We are pleased to have amongst us today Dr. Mihir Bholey. Dr. Mihir Bholey is a senior faculty of Interdisciplinary Design Studies at National Institute of Design, Ahmedabad. He teaches subjects of humanities and social sciences, namely Indian society, comparative aesthetics, semiotics, globalization, urbanization, public policy and design, research methodology, to name a few. Dr. Bholey holds his PhD in social science from CEPT University, Ahmedabad, and Masters in Humanities, English Literature from Patna University. His interdisciplinary doctoral research covers the issue of caste conflict and social justice in Bihar. He is a prolific writer and regularly publishes in different newspapers, magazines, and research journals in India and abroad. He has 3 books to his credit, namely Caste Conflict and Social Justice, The Discourse and Design, Design Samvad in Hindi, and Young Designers, published in 2010. Dr. Bholey has been a visiting professor at the University of Applied Sciences, Northwestern Switzerland, Basel, and has also given seminars and delivered lectures at various premier institutions, namely National University of Singapore, Indian Institute of Technology, Delhi, Delhi University, Patna University, Gujarat University, amongst others. May we please request Dr. Mihir Bholey to come on the dais. To invite Dr. Mihir Bholey for his special address.
Professor Banik, Professor Inar Dave Sahab, Professor Nigam Dave, Professor Santosh Kumar ji, my good friend, Dr. Sanjay Pradhan ji and Sri K. Hariharan Sahab. Extremely delighted to be with all of you, and it's a matter of great privilege to be part of this august gathering of learned teachers, illustrious teachers and professors. I feel a little humble at this point of time because the most humbling experience is when somebody is trying to eulogize you, talking about you, and you are sitting there listening all about yourself. Is a great humbling experience, but thank you so much for all that you've said. I deserve a little bit of it, not all. So, as a teacher of interdisciplinary studies, I think such occasions are very important. They're important because suddenly you have started people realizing the fact that how important interdisciplinary approach is for the sake of the modern kind of education system that we are in. And I would also like to say that this approach of interdisciplinary is not something that we have invented of late. We have rather reinvented it. If you look at knowledge in its totality, the whole body of knowledge, by nature, knowledge is interdisciplinary. It cannot be isolated. That is something which I would like to touch upon today in the 10-15 minutes that you have given me. Though it's a very large discourse, I fully appreciate the constraint of time as well. In our kind of system, in our institution, National Institute of Design, we call it Science and Liberal Arts, SLA. Here you have a different terminology for it, School of Liberal Studies. I think you can alternatively use them. You can interchange them. It's what it is all about. I think liberal arts is nothing but a juxtaposition and integration of different domains of knowledge which we have created. I think to a fairly great extent, it's also the human inability to comprehend knowledge in its totality that we create segments. We try to, segregate humanities from social sciences, and within social sciences, sociology from anthropology, and anthropology from literature, and literature from history, history from philosophy, and so on and so forth. Why? I think that's the question to the students sitting right here. And you'll have to bear with me because though I try to come prepare a little bit, but when I start talking, I don't know where do I end up. That's a typical problem with an interdisciplinary teacher. But a couple of things which I certainly would like to share with you. 3 particular aspects. Number one, how it has evolved over a period of time in the historical context, if you want to look at it, because it's important for the students particularly, not for the learner teachers as much, because I fully appreciate they know much more than I do. But for the students, what has been the chronological fashion, chronological order in which it has evolved? That is something very important for you to understand, and why on earth it is called liberal arts, quote unquote. Because arts by nature is liberal. If arts is not liberal, what is liberal? You must question. You must raise this question in your mind and try and find out the answer yourself. If arts is not liberal, then what can be the liberal thing? And as far as interdisciplinary, the term interdisciplinary is concerned, my good friends, it is not a subject. It is an approach. It is a quest. It's a pursuit. And I think because Sri Hariharan Sahab is also sitting here, I think it's a very appropriate moment to refer something from his background, because I'm sure he would also like to throw some light on that. Cinema in itself is probably one of the most interesting interdisciplinary, genres that we have ever evolved. From drama to theater to cinema and the new media that we are now talking about, the convergent media, where we have different kind of experiences which we are trying to put together. I would also like to give you some ideas too. The real interdisciplinary nature in involvement in the real life experiences. We are involved in the project which we are working with for Tirupati Tirumala Devasthanam. Now, the task which has been given to us is to design a museum of faith. Now tell me, how can you do that? How will you do that? It's something which is so very abstract. And when you say you're trying to create a museum, you have to create something which is a concrete, three-dimensional reality, entity. Point number two, is that you have also been given the brief very strongly that you don't have to mix faith with history. So mythology and history cannot be mixed up, and you cannot mix up. Because mythology says something else, where you have to just close your eyes and accept everything that comes on the face value of it. History says, examine it. So we have historical references, we have mythological references, we have cultural references, and so on and so forth. What approach will you apply to create that? So you have cinema as one example. You have, let's say, museum design for another example. You can have many other examples itself. Design, why not? Yes, that's the institution which I belong to. If you look at it in its totality, it talks about, it's not only about aesthetics. We always try to misconstrue it as something which is part of an aesthetics, a purely aesthetic experience or pursuit, but essentially, quintessentially, design is all about problem solving. How do you creatively solve a problem? All of us try to solve our problem. All of us know how to solve our problems. But the moment you apply your creativity, quote unquote, you go towards what is called design. Management. For example, well, I've been teaching, we have been teaching some subjects which are close to management called strategic design management and so on and so forth. I was sitting in the jury till today. Large part of the discourse of management, where it comes from. You have economics, you have culture, you have language, you have commerce, you have statistics, and so on and so forth. What is management all about? So interdisciplinary, the concept of interdisciplinary becomes so very relevant when you try to apply your mind to find a solution, to find an answer. An answer must be looked at from multiple perspectives, not from one. So that is point number one. I think, historically speaking, somewhere around 1930s, because in the early phase of 20th century, we saw certain emergence of lots of disciplines. History, sociology, for example, came into existence with Auguste Comte somewhere around, I think, first half of 19th century, closely followed by anthropology little later. And also you have subjects like psychology, why not? Which has a long history. And if we go into the history, we will see Aristotle and Socrates, all of them talking about Herodotus, Hippocrates, talking about psychology. And very important person whom we always tend to forget is Ibn Sina, the Arabian scientist, scholar, mathematician, alchemist. He also talked about psychology, I think somewhere around 980 AD. Then, in the modern times, we find around 16th century, 17th century, we find Descartes talking about, psychology. Anthropology, we have already talked about. Political science emerged somewhere around 1876 or something when Johns Hopkins University and Columbia University in 1880, they started talking about political science as a discipline. But then, if you go back into history, can you disconnect it from Aristotle and Plato and Socrates? Because all the original thoughts are there. So there is a continuity in it. But then how they come together? What is the different kind of approach that they give you to understand the reality? There's a very interesting saying which I came across sometimes ago, which says that economics is all about how people make choices. But sociology is all about why don't they have choices to make? Now, what do you call it? What is this? If not two different approaches of looking at the same problem, do you have the choice? Can you make your choices in life? I think there you understand the importance of being interdisciplinary in your approach, because then you'll have to apply all that. Having said that, I would take you to two more short journeys. One is a philosophical journey. There's a purely philosophical context. I'm reminded of one very interesting one-line shloka from Sanskrit. Good, you started you began your session with the recitation of Sanskrit shloka, which is also a ritual. But then in reality, what happens? Let's see. Ekam satya vipra bahuda vadanti. There's only one truth. And the sages would describe, define, discuss it separately from multiple perspectives. Now, this further reminds me of a very interesting story, which is from Upanishad, which is also part of the Jain philosophy in lots of Jain literature. If you want, I can read that, but I can tell you the short version of it as well. How many of you remember that short story of 6 blind men and an elephant? Some of you, few of you have. Okay, I think very few of you know, so let me, for the benefit of the rest, I'll just take 2 minutes to recite. Once upon a time, there lived 6 blind men in a village. One day, the villagers told them, hey, there's an elephant in the village today. They had no idea what an elephant is. They decided, even though we would not be able to see it, let's go and feel it anyway. That was what they decided. All of them went to the elephant to try and see what elephant actually looked like. Hey, the elephant is a pillar, said the first man who touched the elephant's leg. Oh no, it's like a rope, said the second man who touched the tail. Oh no, it's like a thick branch of a tree, said the third man who touched the trunk of the elephant. It's like a big fan, hand fan, said the fourth man who touched the ear of the elephant. It's like a huge wall, said the fifth man who touched the belly of the elephant. It's like a solid pipe, said the sixth person who touched the tusk of the elephant. Now, they began to argue among themselves what it really was. And nobody had a clue. So there was a wise man passing through. He heard their discussion, and he said, "What's the matter?" He asked, "What's the matter?" They said, "We cannot agree what an elephant looks like and what it is all about." So each one have told them their part of experience that they had. Then the wise man calmly explained to them, "All of you are right. The reason every one of you is telling differently because each one of you have touched different parts of the elephant, not the elephant in totality. So, actually, the elephant is all that each one of you have seen and all that you have not seen. So when you put them together, elephant in its totality would emerge. The idea of that white elephant or the big black elephant or the elephant which is a sense of pride for the Indian tradition as well. I think this is something very similar to the Jain philosophy of Anekantvad, which tells you to test the truth from multiple reality, from multiple perspective. Not only that, what is even more important is to agree to disagree, to understand that somebody else also has a viewpoint. You don't just discuss, don't just argue, you also try to converse things at some focal point, which does not generally happen in day-to-day life, unfortunately. We don't agree to disagree. That's our human weakness. So it's also known as Sahyavad in Jain philosophy, Anekantvad and Sahyavad. It's also associated with Bhagwan Mahavir in 6th century BC. He was the 24th Tirthankar. If you look at it from our own, in the Hindu philosophical contemplation, we have lots of examples. Let me recite a very short shloka. I think many of you would have heard it at some point of time, which is Om Purnamidam Purnasya Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaye Purnameva Vashishyate. What does it mean? It means that is full, this is also full. From fullness comes this fullness. Taking fullness from fullness, fullness indeed remains. What does it talk about? Does it talk about philosophy? Does it talk about mathematics? Does it talk about rhetoric? What? That is where you need to apply your mind. Yet another very interesting shloka from, I'm rather tempted to refer, from Isha Vasyopanishad. And then try to apply your mind because it's a very interesting thing. Because it gives you a perspective to look at things from multiple angles. There's a shloka which talks about Atma Tattva. If you translate it in English, it is soul content. Soul content, which is a near translation. This lady sitting right here was talking about the limitations of translation. I was attending your session there. Yes, translation has a limitation. Because it has a cultural context, you can't really transfer all the ideas. It says, Tade jati tanne jati taddure tadvantike tadantarasya sarvasya tadu sarvasmasya vadvata. Now, if you try to explain it, listen carefully what it talks about, and then you will find the answer. Let me explain it to you in Hindi because I think it will be much easier for you also to understand, though I can translate for your benefit in English. वह चलता है तथा नहीं भी चलता है, वह दूर है तथापि निकट भी है, वह सबके अंदर है सबके बाहर भी. What is this? What is this phenomena which is being talked about? Philosophy, mathematics, physics, and now in a purely scientific context, this problem arose in the 20th century with the advent of quantum physics and theory of relativity. Where people tried to explore these aspects of reality because then they identified that there is nothing called matter, everything is wave. Matter can dismantle, wave can disintegrate, and wave will not. So, I would like to quote a very important atomic scientist, Oppenheimer, who talks about the same concept in a scientific context. He says, again, for the benefit of all, I would try to explain that in Hindi. मिसाल के तौर पर अगर आपसे पूछें कि इलेक्ट्रॉन की स्थिति क्या सदा एक सी बनी रहती है, तो हमें कहना पड़ेगा नहीं. अगर हम पूछें कि इलेक्ट्रॉन की स्थिति क्या समय के साथ बदलती रहती है, तो हमें फिर कहना पड़ेगा हरगिज़ नहीं. अगर हम पूछें कि इलेक्ट्रॉन विश्राम की अवस्था में है, इज इट इन स्टेट ऑफ रेस्ट, द आंसर इज नन, नो. फाइनली, अंततः अगर हम पूछें तब क्या इलेक्ट्रॉन गतिमान है, तो हमें फिर इसे अस्वीकारना पड़ेगा. दैट इज व्हाट यू हैव जस्ट हर्ड in this shloka. This is something which came into existence close to the 20th century, late 19th century and 20th century, of course. But then this was a quest with which lots of philosophical mind in ancient times, including people like Vedavyasa, Yagyavalk, Vaishampayan, Buddha, Lotse, all of them have talked about this particular aspect of reality from different perspectives, from multiple angles. In modern days, you also had Pythagoras, you also had psychologists called Freud, Albert Jung, and many more who are trying to grapple with a similar kind of reality. So how do you find what the reality is all about? The question is, how do we know what we know? That is the biggest question. आपको पता है कि आप क्या जानते हैं, और अगर आप जानते हैं तो आप कैसे जानते हैं? Who is the observer? So, I mean, these are very contemplative philosophical questions. The reason why I have brought it here for discussion is that you must understand, we must appreciate the fact that reality needs to be looked at from multiple perspectives, and that is where this interdisciplinary approach becomes important. In scientific terms, in early 20th century, when the scientists were entirely puzzled with this revolution of quantum physics and quantum mechanics, we have another important physicist called Arthur Eddington, who coined the term called scientific epistemology. What is it all about? Where science and philosophy come together and converge. So what is the key word, my dear students? The key word here is synthesis, is convergence. Convergence of different knowledge, convergence of different ideas, and convergence of multiple perspectives. That is what interdisciplinary is about. Eddington said, due to the emerging compulsions of the subject, physicists had to turn to scientific epistemology, the same way pure mathematics had to turn to logic, and the mathematicians become logicians. What is mathematics if not the application of logic? Devoid of the application of logic, can you visualize mathematics? I'm really scared of it, because maybe I'm not good at mathematics. I know I'm very horrible at mathematics, but then I understand the logic which is applied there. I think I have 2 more minutes, so I can finish. So science, religion, ethics, logic, philosophy, all these different subjects, disciplines that we understand, that we today know about, are basically different perspectives to look at the same reality. And it has become all the more imperative in today's context, because we know that to solve a problem, if we come to from philosophy to the mundane world, we understand the fact that to solve the problem, we need an approach where interdisciplinary alone can work. There's a fundamental difference between interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary. Multidisciplinary is just juxtaposition of different disciplines. They don't allow you, you can compare and contrast in a multidisciplinary environment. I can call it multidisciplinary is the ecosystem in which the interdisciplinary flourishes. You must have a multidisciplinary environment, which you have here, thankfully, at PDPU and in many other universities also, where we have also been part of some university at some point of time. We have also studied history and philosophy and sociology and psychology and many other subjects, but separately. Now at this point of time, where I've almost crossed more than half of my life, half life is left, I think little, that would be a little more, but anyway, we realize that what is the importance of this interdisciplinary approach. Finally, two more things. You must have heard of, you can recall Einstein, Albert Einstein, without which any discussion on science in modern context will not be possible. He says that science can only ascertain what is, but not what it should be. So you have moral and ethics involved here. And outside of its domain, value judgment of all kinds remain necessary. So science, unfortunately, has become value neutral. Value has to be added to science. Ethics has to be added to science. How will you do that? Otherwise, science becomes completely unrestrained the way it is becoming now. Sorry, Professor Hariharan Sahab, we discussed something with you in that informal discussion. I still believe that mechanisms of social control are very, very imperative. Democracy, freedom, everything is fine, but then if you lose the boundary, if you exceed your boundary, you just go haywire. And that is where morals and ethics have a role to play in the society and in all the domains, no matter whether it is science, social science, or something else. So that is what I would like to stress upon. Religion, on the other hand, deals only with the evolution of human thoughts and actions. It cannot justifiably speak of facts, of relationship between facts. That is the weakness of religion. So how you can integrate science and religion to create a new edifice? That is where interdisciplinary approach would be so very crucial. Finally, to conclude, and it is not just incidental. In my case, it's also providential. I don't know. Some time ago, when I used to edit a magazine for NID called Design Plus for nearly 10 years, I was the founder editor. And I used to write my concluding column, which was called Concludingly. So it is just providential in my case that I always have to conclude things. So concludingly, I'm reminded of one of the finest poets of modern English literature, very close to my heart, W.B. Yeats, on whom at one point of time, had I not researched on social science, I would have rather researched on W.B. Yeats, and I was actually registered under the university to research on the mind and art of W.B. Yeats. Unfortunately, I couldn't do that. But I'm reminded of one of his most striking and wonderful, philosophical poetry called Among School Children. Last 4 lines. O chestnut tree, great rooted blossomer, are you the leaf, the blossom, or the bowl? O bodies swayed to music, O brightening glance, how can we know the dancer from the dance? That is the typical, philosophical question. That how can you disintegrate things? How can you look at things in a disintegrated manner? How can you find out whether the tree that is in front of you is the leaf or the trunk or the flower or the fruit, or it's all? That is the philosophical question that he raises. I think unless we are in a position to integrate them, we probably don't find an answer. And if one may have to interpret this, what would be the different perspectives from which you interpret it? Philosophy. I also teach semiotics, so I can say, yes, science signifies significance. Semiotics is involved there. So will it be a philosophical interpretation, or semiotic interpretation, or an aesthetic interpretation? What all. Thank you very much for your patient hearing, and it was really delighting being with you. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much.